Welcome back to our course on Dreamweaver CC. In this section we're going to get to the very important point of starting to work on our first website. And just before I do that, I've opened Dreamweaver and it's opened exactly how it was last time that I closed it, with that Files panel in the middle. I'm going to tell you quite a bit about panels later on in the course. But in the meantime, there are a couple of easy ways you can deal with panels that you don't like the look of. As you saw earlier on, you can largely control which panels you can see by checking and unchecking items on the Windows menu. So for instance, if I uncheck Files, that will basically close the Files panel. But in fact, this particular panel is not the only one in this sort of group here, because there's also Insert. Now I'm going to explain more about this situation where you have a couple of panels like that together. If I actually were to just uncheck Files, I would still finish up with this sort of block here, and if I click on Insert, I can see Insert. If I click on Files, I can still see Files. But if I use the button to the right there, click on that and say Close Tab Group, you'll see that the whole thing disappears. So if a particular panel is annoying you, that's one way of getting rid of it. Note that if I click on Files up here again, I get that group back. So it's pretty easy to switch things on and off until I tell you more about how to control them. So back to the subject of this particular section, and that is that we're going to start actually putting together a website now, and then we're actually going to publish it to the outside world. Now the website that we're going to produce is going to be an extremely simple one to begin with, and then throughout the course we're going to gradually add more and more details and features to the website. Now a couple of things I need to explain to begin with, and one of them is that there are two basic types of website. Now to some extent I'm really oversimplifying here, but in essence it really is as straightforward as this. And that is that you have static websites and dynamic websites. Now a static website is one where the content of each of the pages on the website is static. So somebody, in this case you, designs and creates the pages, perhaps puts some pictures on, some text, maybe some tabular numeric data, can even have some media in it such as video showing and so on. But basically everything that's on the page has been put there deliberately in a particular position, and until the person changes the page, that page will always look the same. And that is the sort of page that we're basically concerned with on this course. Now having said that, what you are going to learn on this course will not only enable you to create some pretty good static websites, but will also tell you a lot about what you need to know to create dynamic websites. Dynamic websites are sites where there is an element of, if you like, static page design, in that a page will have a certain design, but the content will actually be retrieved usually from a database, or what's more generally called a content management system, a CMS. And at any point in time what you see on the page will vary depending on a number of things. Now I'm going to show you an example of a dynamic website, and it's probably one of the best known examples of a dynamic website in the world. Now the site that we're looking at here is Amazon.com. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that every possible page that you can see in Amazon.com has not been handcrafted by somebody using Dreamweaver. Given that somebody who wants to do some shopping can type anything they like into the search box, and then, as I'm sure you'll know, you could filter it by department, star ratings and so on. There's a very dynamic element to what you see on a page in Amazon.com, and you may well be looking at a page that nobody has ever seen before. The particular combination of settings that you've selected may be completely unique, and therefore the page you're looking at is completely unique. Now the people that work on the Amazon.com website are pretty good at working with dynamic websites, as I'm sure you'll agree, but I'm pretty sure they also all started out learning the basic tools of their trade on static websites, because ultimately when you look at a page on Amazon.com, you are still looking at a page with HTML code and with a lot of the basic structures in place that you're going to learn on this course. Now admittedly it's got some other things as well, but the basics are very much a common feature of websites. So now it's time to start building that first website. And the first question is, what is a website? Well, in the case of a static website, we're talking about a set of HTML pages. And I'm keeping this a very simple model to begin with, and we'll elaborate on it a little bit more later on. But normally we have a set of pages in a folder on, in this case, my local computer. And the site, when I build it first, is what we call my local site. It's the one on my computer and the one that I normally work on. But because it's on my computer and because the contents of my computer, I hope, are not particularly visible to the outside world, when I want the outside world to see those pages, I make a copy of the pages from my local site onto a thing called a web server. And that copy is called the remote site, and the remote site is the one that the world sees. So when we talk about a website, we're almost always talking about at least two sites. The local site where we do the work, and the remote site, which is the one that's actually published for the outside world to see. Now in fact there can be other copies. For instance, we might have a copy for testing, but we'll come back to that later on. For the moment we'll just stick to those two. Now in order to create my local site, I'm going to need a folder. In fact, Dreamweaver can create the folder for you, but I'm going to create it myself in this case. So I'm using Windows 8, File Explorer, and I've browsed to a folder called SSI Dreamweaver CC Scratch Files, which is where I'm going to put all of the things that I work on as I work through this course. And within that folder I'm going to create another folder, which is the folder which will actually contain my website. Now if you're using Windows 7, you'll be using Windows Explorer. Basically it will work the same way as this. The icons, menus and things are slightly different. But if I click on the relevant button for creating a new folder, I'm going to call it Springs Park Website. The nature park for which I'm creating the website I've decided to call Springs Park, and the Springs Park website files will live in that folder, that Springs Park website folder. You need to create a folder somewhere, you need to remember where it is, to contain your first website as well. You can call it anything you like. It doesn't in any way impact on the name that you ultimately give to your attraction or whatever else you are building a website for. And if you're already aware of the fact that you're going to need an internet domain name at some point, this doesn't have to bear any relation to ultimately the internet domain name that you're going to use, as you will see. But just make sure that you have a folder ready to receive the files for your first website. So the folder's ready. Now I'm going to go back into Dreamweaver. I've got the welcome screen there, and in that create new column in the middle, right near the bottom, one of the options is Dreamweaver Site. Click on Dreamweaver Site. Now this comes up with a dialog for site setup for unnamed site 2. Now I'm going to first of all give my site a name. Now once again, this name doesn't have to correspond to the internet domain name of the site. It doesn't have to correspond to the name of the folder that I'm putting the files in and so on. But clearly you need to remember what goes with what. So there are some big advantages in using names that remind you of what each site refers to. So I'm going to call this one Springs Park. Now I choose a local site folder. Dreamweaver will give me a default site folder. In Windows, this will be in one of my personal areas on the C drive. Now, as you know, I've already created the folder I'm going to use for this. If I click on that button to the right, that will let me browse to the folder that I just created. So I select Springs Park website and click on Select Folder. And having done that, all I really need to do at this stage is to select Save. And my site has now been created. Now, when I did that, the little Files panel appeared. What I'm going to do is just open that up a little bit. Note that if I drag the Files panel by its header to another place, hover over the bottom right hand corner, I can make it a little bit bigger. And what you can see there is a list of the files in my local website. And you perhaps won't be surprised to learn that it is completely empty. I have put nothing in my local site at all yet. One thing to notice, apart from the name Springs Park there, which is the name of the site, is this says local view here. I'm looking at the local site, and if I click on the drop down there, I have some other options: the remote server, the testing server, and repository view. Now, I'm only in the early stages of the course going to be interested in local view and remote server. Remote server we're going to look at in the next section. This section we're just looking at local view, and my site is completely empty. And in fact, if I used File Explorer to take a look in that folder that I created just a little while ago, I would see that that folder is indeed still completely empty. So an empty site isn't really going to be particularly useful, so let's put a page into the site. We're going to create a temporary home page. What goes on this page doesn't matter at this stage, because we're going to create a really nice home page a little bit later on. But we are going to create the first page to go in the site. That Files panel, you know how to close it. There's another way that you can do it, and that is if you click on Collapse to Icons. You can see the screen tip there. That actually makes that a tiny little panel that, again, I can drag by its header and put it out of the way. I need a new page. You know how to create a new page. You click on HTML. It's empty to begin with. I'm going to give it a title of Home Page. And then within the body of the page, I'm going to type. There we are. That's all it's going to say to begin with. Now, what I need to do is to save that home page in my site. So I need to save it in that folder, and it will become the home page of the Springs Park website. Now, as I'll explain in more detail later on, there are conventions for naming home pages in web in general and Dreamweaver in particular, and I'm going to stick with the conventions. In fact, there are a few options here, but nowadays the most commonly used option for the home page of a static site is to call that page index.html. That's what I'm going to call this one. So instead of closing this page and throwing it away, I'm actually going to save it. Now, to do that, if I click on the File menu on the top left, one of the options there is Save As. Now, when I'm working on a site, by default, the location that a page will be saved in is that folder that I created, what's called the site root folder. So it's the root of the website. As I say, we're going to call it index.html. The default name for a home page, or perhaps I should say one of the default names for a home page, and I'm going to click on Save. Now let me just open up the Files panel again, expand panels, again note the screen tip, drag that over there, and now within my site I've got my first page, index.html. I now technically have a website with a single page on it. Now, I'm the only person that can see this website at the moment. I want to publish it to the big wide world, and that's what we're going to cover in the next section. And whether you're working on Springs Park or something else, try to make sure that you've got to the same point with the development of your website. You've created a root folder, you've put a home page in it, temporary home page will be fine, And in the next section, I'll take you through the process of publishing your site for the wide world to see. That's the end of this section. I will see you in the next one.